At 04, 26 hours local time, the Pacific Ocean was almost black. Only the reflection of a thin, ghostly moon broke across the surface as a small, low-profile vessel cut silently through the waves. Two men sat behind the wheel faces, hidden beneath balaclavas, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They were running the Eastern Corridor, the most dangerous of tours and profitable narco route in the hemisphere. Their fiberglass hull carried more than fuel and adrenaline. It carried bricks of cocaine wrapped in waterproof tarps, money for a regime, and death for anyone who got in the way. What they didn't know was that more than 600 miles overhead, an American satellite had already seen them. Every infrared flicker of their engines, every encrypted radio ping, every signal bouncing toward Venezuela's coast had been tagged and tracked. The order to strike would not come from a local commander. It would come from the President of the United States himself. In Washington, the chain of command was short and cold. Intelligence confirmed the target. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was briefed on the location, movement, and payload. Then came the words that would seal two fates on the water execute. By dawn, the world would see the explosion in a clip only 6 seconds long, released by Hegseth on his social feed. But what that video didn't show was the immense machine that made it possible. The U.S. Navy's newest strike network had already triangulated the boat's coordinates through a system of systems web stretching from a KH-11 reconnaissance satellite to a Reaper drone orbiting 22,000 feet above the Pacific. The Reaper's ANDES-1 MTSB sensor was locked on infrared. Each heat bloom from the twin 250-horsepower engines painted a bright mark across its screen. At 04:59, the drone's camera recorded a small wake of V-shaped signature cutting against a mild sea state. Aboard the control center at Joint Interagency Task Force South in Key West, analysts matched that pattern to a known smuggling vessel registered to the Venezuelan Cartel Tren de Aragua. Cross-referencing intelligence from the DEA, NSA, and Coast Guard confirmed what the Pentagon already suspected: this was not a fisherman's boat. This was a floating artery in a billion-dollar drug empire protected by the Venezuelan state. For months, these go-fast boats had sprinted from the Venezuelan coast toward the Galapagos Gap, moving tons of cocaine toward Central America. They were fast, cheap, and nearly invisible on radar. They operated on the edge of physics, small enough to evade detection, big enough to carry thousands of pounds of narcotics. But speed and stealth mean nothing against an eye that never blinks. Since early September, the United States had shifted its naval posture across Latin America's waters. Under what officials called Operation Sentinel South, 8 major U.S. Navy vessels now prowled the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. The USS Bainbridge, USS Gravely, and USS Kidd were assigned to patrol narco corridors supported by Coast Guard cutters and maritime patrol aircraft. Meanwhile, the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest supercarrier, had quietly passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, her escort group fanning out across the hemisphere. For Washington, this was deterrence through presence. For the cartels, it was the beginning of the end. The morning of the strike began like dozens before it. The Reaper drone, controlled remotely from Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, maintained a loiter pattern over the Eastern Pacific. Its sensor operator watched the suspected vessel for nearly 2 hours, documenting erratic course changes, mid-ocean rendezvous maneuvers, and no navigation lights. Intelligence officers relayed updates through encrypted satellite links to the Pentagon, where Hegseth and his advisors assembled the case for lethal authorization. At 09:12 Washington time, the president received the briefing. His directive was blunt: take them out. At sea level, the target was oblivious. The two men adjusted their outboards, burning fuel to maintain speed. They had no idea that in the infrared spectrum, their exhaust glowed like a flare in a tunnel. The Reaper's Hellfire missile selected the heat signature automatically. One tone, then two, locked. The strike came in silence. There was no warning shot, no radio hail, no attempt at interception. Just a sudden white bloom in the darkness captured by the drone's sensor, a pinpoint of light swelling into a fireball as fuel and fiberglass vaporized. In less than a heartbeat, the vessel disintegrated. Debris scattered across the sea. A rolling shock wave faded into nothingness. 2 men, 2 engines, and several hundred kilos of narcotics vanished from the face of the earth. In Washington, Defense Secretary Hegseth uploaded the short, unclassified clip. Intelligence confirmed that the vessel was involved in illicit narcotics smuggling, he said. 2 male narco-terrorists aboard were killed. No U.S. personnel were harmed. He added a phrase that would echo across the intelligence community. "We're not fighting fishermen. We're fighting terrorists on the water." Behind behind the statement, the numbers told a story of escalation. More than a dozen such strikes had already been executed since early September in both the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. The toll exceeded 50 dead, dozens of vessels destroyed, and an uncounted volume of narcotics lost. Each engagement followed the same sequence: detection by satellite, confirmation by drone, authorization from Washington, strike within minutes. For military analysts, it was a textbook example of the American kill chain, a process designed to eliminate threats faster than they could adapt. But not everyone was satisfied. On Capitol Hill, several lawmakers criticized the campaign, questioning whether the administration had the constitutional authority to launch lethal operations without congressional approval. They demanded evidence that the targeted boats were indeed smuggling narcotics and not misidentified civilian vessels. Some used words like undeclared conflict and executive overreach. Others called it a necessary evolution, the convergence of counterterrorism and counter-narcotics under a single doctrine of maritime interdiction. President Trump dismissed the criticism. In an impromptu press exchange outside the White House on October 23rd, he told reporters, "I don't think we're going to ask for a declaration of war. We're just going to kill people bringing drugs into our country. Okay, we're going to kill them. They're going to be dead." The statement shocked Washington, but it perfectly summarized the new operational mindset. The United States was no longer content to chase smugglers through legal loopholes. It would hunt them wherever they sailed. The geography of that hunt was no coincidence. Many of the strikes had occurred off the Venezuelan coast, a region increasingly tied to narcotics networks, and political corruption. Under Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's ports and naval bases had become safe havens for cartel logistics. Intelligence analysts described the relationship between the state and the traffickers as symbiotic. The regime provided cover, and the cartels provided revenue. For Washington, that made them one and the same. Earlier in the year, the administration had formally designated several Latin American cartels as terrorist organizations, including the notorious Tren de Aragua. The label was more than symbolic. It allowed the Pentagon to apply the laws of armed conflict to cartel assets. Ships, warehouses, and even aircraft linked to those groups could now be treated as legitimate military targets. With that legal foundation, the Navy and Air Force operated in a gray zone, not war, not peace, but active enforcement through precision strikes. As the campaign expanded, so did the hardware. The Gerald R. Ford Shore Carrier Strike Group, led by the most advanced carrier in the world, was rerouted toward the Caribbean to support what Pentagon officials called persistent maritime dominance. The Ford's ANSPI-6 radar array and F-35C squadrons provided overwatch for an area spanning thousands of miles. The USS Bainbridge and USS Gravely acted as fast reaction platforms ready to assist in recovery, surveillance, or interdiction after each strike. For sailors aboard those ships, the mission blurred the line between law enforcement and warfare. They weren't exchanging fire with enemy fleets. They were executing high-tech ambushes against invisible targets. Every hour at sea meant scanning radar feeds for small, fast-moving dots, most harmless, a few deadly. The tension never left. One sonar technician aboard Bainbridge described it later. "It's like hunting in fog. You don't see the threat until it's gone." The night after the strike, the Pacific was calm again. Only drifting debris marked where the boat had been. A Coast Guard aircraft from Panama City arrived to photograph the site, confirming total destruction. The Reaper returned to base. Mission time 6 hours. Distance from takeoff to impact 1,400 miles. Collateral damage 0. In the Pentagon Situation Room, analysts replayed the footage at quarter speed. Every frame told a story of precision from satellite cueing to missile impact. The data showed a perfect chain of efficiency detection to authorization in under 10 minutes engagement in less than 1. It was modern warfare distilled to mathematics. Still, questions remained. Who were the men aboard? What was their connection to Tren de Aragua? Intelligence units traced satellite phone numbers recovered from previous raids. One matched a network used by a known cartel financier operating under the protection of Venezuelan intelligence. Another pinged near La Guaira, a naval port east of Caracas. To the analysts, it confirmed what they'd suspected: these were not random smugglers. They were state-protected assets moving drugs to fund a criminal government. As dawn broke over Washington, Hegseth briefed the press again. His tone was measured but unmistakably firm. "This operation demonstrates the reach, precision, and resolve of U.S. forces," he said. "Our objective is simple: deny the cartels freedom of movement. No safe harbors, no untouchables. Behind him, a large still image from the strike hung on a monitor, a single flame against endless water. In Caracas, President Maduro appeared on state television hours later, visibly angry. He condemned the attack as an act of aggression against Venezuelan sovereignty and vowed to protect national maritime interests. His navy quietly raised alert levels, but in practice there was little they could do. The Venezuelan fleet, plagued by fuel shortages and obsolete ships, could barely patrol its own coastline. American drones could loiter over its waters for hours without challenge. Among ordinary Venezuelans, reactions were mixed. Some viewed the strike as foreign interference. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, the Americans were doing what their own government refused to do: dismantle the cartel networks that had turned once peaceful coastal towns into smuggling hubs. In barrios across Maracaibo and Carupano, murals of Tren de Aragua symbols were defaced overnight. Fear had turned into calculation. Association now meant exposure. Within U.S. military circles, the debate turned to strategy. Was this sustainable deterrence or escalation? The Navy's own after-action report concluded that precision drone strikes were cheaper and safer than traditional interdictions. A single Hellfire, costing roughly $115,000, could eliminate millions in narcotics and months of cartel logistics. By comparison, deploying a destroyer for an intercept cost nearly $500,000 per day. Efficiency favored the sky. Yet the psychological effect was just as valuable as the material one. Every strike sent a ripple of fear through smuggling networks. Boat captains refused new contracts. Cartel financiers rerouted shipments inland, exposing them to Colombian and Panamanian forces. For once, the ocean, once their refuge, had become the enemy's trap. Inside the Situation Room, advisors discussed next steps. Intelligence suggested multiple cartel vessels were preparing departures from Venezuelan and Ecuadorian ports within the week. Surveillance assets were repositioned, drones fueled, satellites retasked. The machine was already spinning again. By evening, the president summed it up in one line during a phone interview. "We're not at war with Venezuela. We're at war with the poison they export." The simplicity of the phrase belied the complexity of the campaign, a blend of covert operations, real-time surveillance, and instantaneous strikes woven into one seamless operation of deterrence. The following day, a new unclassified clip surfaced: another strike, another explosion in the dark. Same pattern, same efficiency. The message was unmistakable. The ocean was no longer a safe highway for narcotics. For the sailors of the Ford Strike Group, it was a quiet victory. They knew that somewhere beyond the horizon, their presence had tilted the balance. They didn't see the politics, only the mission. To them, each operation was a puzzle solved, a threat erased, a life possibly saved back home. As the sun set behind the carrier's island tower, one petty officer stood on deck and watched the sky fade from orange to deep blue. The smell of jet fuel and salt hung in the air. He thought about the video that had gone viral, the 6-second burst of light. He thought about the two men who had been on that boat and about the thousands of families ruined by the drugs they carried. Then he turned back to the flight deck where an F-18's engine screamed to life. The machine never stopped. Hours later, far below the surface of the Pacific, the last remnants of the cartel vessel settled into silence. Fish circled the twisted metal and canvas. In a few days, the sea would erase the evidence entirely. But in databases across Washington, the event would remain etched in ones and zeros, timestamp coordinates, target confirmed. The United States had sent a message written in precision: and fire, the ocean belongs to law, not chaos. And as long as those waters are patrolled by the American fleet, there will be no sanctuary for those who trade in death. The aftermath resonated far beyond the Pacific. European intelligence agencies began sharing maritime data with Southcom. The Colombian Navy coordinated new interdictions. Even allies in Africa adjusted their routes, anticipating a world where oceanic drug corridors were no longer invisible. For the cartels, the era of impunity was ending. For the U.S. Navy, it was proof that 21st century warfare wasn't about fleets clashing, but about networks outthinking networks. In the end, the strike on that Venezuelan cartel boat was more than an explosion. It was the moment a doctrine crystallized the union of intelligence technology and political will into a single decisive act. It showed that a superpower doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just watches, calculates, and removes. And somewhere on the waves, as another smuggler throttled his engine into the night, he glanced up at the sky, wondering if that faint, silent glimmer above was a star or the last thing he'd ever see. Because out here in the waters off Venezuela, the U.S. Navy doesn't warn twice. It just strikes and then it's gone.